Good evening, everybody. Before we get started on tonight's hearing, I would like to make a few opening remarks. My name is Craig Labadie. I have been hired by the City of Palo Alto to serve as a hearing officer for a closure application filed by the owner of the Buena Vista mobile home park. My background is that I've been an attorney for 33 years. I specialize in the representation of cities and other local government agencies in California. At the outset, I would like to thank the city staff who made the arrangements to reserve this room. It was quite an undertaking, and also they arranged a Spanish language interpreter so that everybody can hear and participate in the proceedings. I also wanted to thank the legal counsel for both parties who have worked together to develop a schedule for the orderly presentation of evidence during this hearing. The purpose of this hearing is to determine whether or not the mitigation measures proposed by the park owner, including relocation assistance, are adequate to mitigate the adverse impacts of closure on the park residents pursuant to state law and the Palo Alto Municipal Code. The parties to this proceeding are the park owner and the park residents. Each side will be given an opportunity to present both oral testimony and also documents supporting their position. The attorney for the park owner, as the applicant, will go first, followed by the attorney for the Park Residents Association and any witnesses they choose to call. Then, after that is concluded, individual residents of the mobile home park will be given an opportunity to speak. After the parties have concluded their presentations and the residents have had an opportunity to speak, there will be a chance for members of the public to speak. Depending upon the amount of time left and the number of people who wish to speak, I will set a time limit for each speaker of a few minutes. Based on the proposed schedule developed by legal counsel for the parties, we currently expect that the public comment portion of this hearing will take place on Wednesday night. I understand there's been a good deal of community interest in this hearing and that there may be strong feelings on both sides of the issues presented. I would respectfully ask that the members of the audience be respectful of all speakers, even those you may disagree with. Please do not interrupt any speakers with clapping or booing. After the hearing is concluded, the parties will have a chance to submit legal briefs. I will then review all the evidence and arguments presented and ultimately issue a written tentative decision as to whether or not the relocation assistance proposed by the applicant is adequate. The parties will have an opportunity to comment on that tentative decision before it becomes final. After it is final, my decision can be appealed to the Palo Alto City Council. A few housekeeping items that staff has asked me to mention. As you know, there is a Spanish language interpreter here. We also have a court reporter recording the proceedings verbatim and ultimately will prepare a transcript of the proceedings. Because of their tasks, we're going to have to take a break of about 10 minutes each hour to give them an opportunity to rest and so they can don't get too tired and they're able to record the proceedings. There are restrooms both in the back on this side and also outside. When it gets to the public comment period, there are speaker cards, and we'll ask that speakers fill out a card. And if you can, identify your name and the mobile home park space if you're a park resident. For all the speakers, including attorneys and witnesses and members of the public, please speak slowly so that the interpreter and the court reporter can capture your remarks. Before I invite the attorney for the park owner to begin her presentation, does either of the attorneys have any initial procedural matters you wish to discuss at this time?
No, thank you.
Okay. If not, then we'll get started, and I'll turn this over to Ms. Nanda.
You said there were cards for speakers to fill out. Where are those cards?
I'm sorry, the cards are to the side here. There are also, in addition to the speaker cards, there also are some informational materials on the hearing procedures.
Good evening, Mr. Labadie. As you know, I am Margaret Nanda, the attorney for the Gisser family, the owners of Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. With me here tonight is Joe Gisser on behalf of his family and my associate, Brian Grasser. For the past 34 years, I have specialized in representing mobile home park owners in their park operations, and I've also acted as the lead attorney in 6 park closures from San Jose to Windsor in Sonoma County. I'm going to stand up for just a second. I would like, on behalf of the park owner, to acknowledge all of the residents who are here tonight. The last time we met, some of you or most of you, was in December 2012. I want to acknowledge and thank you for your presence here tonight, and indicate that we do, of course, understand very deeply your position and opposition with regard to the closure of the park. By way of opening statement, I would, of course, direct the hearing officer's attention to the relocation impact report, also referred to as the RIR, which has been submitted and deemed complete by the City of Palo Alto. Further, I would like to take a few moments to expound on matters which are mentioned in the relocation impact report, but add some further substance. The Gisser family and other partners purchased the park in 1986 along with the land which fronts El Camino. In 1999, the partnership which owned the property dissolved, and the Gisser family purchased the other partnership's interest. That sale from the former partners to the Gisser family triggered a reassessment of property taxes, which were the main catalyst in October 1999 for a 90-day rent increase notice effective January 1, 2000. That rent increase notice prompted many of the tenants to go to the city and ask for relief from that rent increase notice. The first hearing held by the city on the issue of a rent increase moratorium occurred on December 11, 2000, and was held without notice to the park owner, and the Gisser family only appeared at the second hearing on December 18th, after they had read an article in the Palo Alto Daily News. The council ultimately enacted an ordinance establishing an emergency rent freeze and directed staff to write a rent control and mobile home park conversion ordinance. The council returned to the issue at special meetings on April 30th and May 14th, 2001. At that time, the council adopted both the mobile home park conversion ordinance and the rent control ordinance. I have presented to you, Mr. Labadie, and Ms. Morris, copies of the relevant city council meetings in 2000 and 2001. I think it is worth noting that the majority of the discussion at the city council meetings was about the rent increase and not about the conversion ordinance. The conversion ordinance was seen as furthering the goals of the rent control ordinance. However, there is discussion among the council members, staff, and Mr. Gisser about a 10-year life expectancy for this park. However, it was noted that the ordinance would not sunset in 10 years. I point this out only because, as a part of the discussion, Mr. Gisser made it clear that he was not planning on operating the park indefinitely. The city promised at the conclusion of the hearing to conduct further study and hearings by the council in July 2001 on how to preserve the park as mobile home housing. Mr. Gisser, however, was never party to any further discussion with the City of Palo Alto after the enactment of both the conversion ordinance and the rent control ordinance, and to the best of his knowledge, no such preservation discussion occurred, or none that he was ever notified about. My point in revisiting the history of the creation of the conversion ordinance is to point out that even with the limited discussion about its provisions, the comments from two council members were that the ordinance appeared to require mitigation assistance which exceeded state law. Once the announcement of the closure of Buena Vista in November 2012 was made to the residents, and after the meetings with the residents, which the City of Palo Alto initiated and conducted in December 2012, my office began preparation of the RIR. In my view, as someone who has closed parks in 6 other jurisdictions with other mobile home park conversion ordinances, the ordinance in Palo Alto is extremely poorly drafted. It does not require, for example, as many ordinances do, a period of time for negotiations between the park owner and the residents for their purchase of the park. It does not contemplate how the real relocation of a resident occurs, which begins with private discussion between the resident and the housing relocation specialist. It does not allow for that part of the process to begin early so that the residents can get on lists for affordable housing units. It requires the collection of useless data about other mobile home parks within a 35-mile radius, which information is not current by the time the park actually closes. It requires appraisals of the homes, but does not require that they be done within a certain period of time prior to their purchase by the park owner. In this case, it took 12 months and 6 versions of the RIR before it was deemed complete by city staff. In each of those revisions, counsel for the residents' associations clearly articulated their objections to various portions of the report, and in many cases, the city merely repeated verbatim counsel's objections. And I see that in the binder that they are presenting that they have included their numerous letters about the RIR and its deficiencies. We now have before you a much scrutinized relocation impact report deemed complete by city staff, which the park owner believes does in fact meet the requirements of the ordinance and that the mitigation measures are adequate to mitigate the adverse impacts on the displaced residents. With respect to the conversion ordinance, it does correctly state that the ordinance is subject to state law, specifically the mobile home residency law, which begins at Civil Code Section 798, and the provisions of the Subdivision Map Act, specifically Government Code 65863.7. To recap briefly, there are 2 categories of mitigation assistance which are contemplated by the conversion ordinance. The first category is for those mobile homeowners who are able to relocate their homes to other mobile home parks. As has been discussed in the RIR and indeed was even acknowledged by the City Council in its discussion at the time of the adoption of the ordinance, very few homes at Buena Vista will be relocated, primarily because of their age. However, as the RIR notes, there are certain mobile homes which are newer in age, and the RVs and fifth-wheelers may be relocated. There are no other mobile home parks in Palo Alto, thus any relocation will take that particular homeowner to a new city. Whether spaces are available in area parks at the time that the closure takes place is unknown. It remains to be seen. In general, in my experience, there are spaces in mobile home parks in cities which are a greater distance from Palo Alto, including the East Bay, the South Bay, such as Morgan Hill, or locations even further than 35 miles from Palo Alto. The mitigation assistance offered to a homeowner who can relocate his or her mobile home requires, per the ordinance, removal of the home, transportation to its new location, and setup of the home, all at the owner's cost. Further, the cost of moving all personal property is to be paid for by the park owner, as well as lodging while the home is being moved. At the new mobile home park, the park owner will pay what is referred to as the startup costs, the first and last month's rent, and the security deposit required at the new park. Further, as provided in the ordinance, a 100% rent subsidy, meaning the difference between the current rent at Buena Vista and the new rent at another park, will be paid for a period of 12 months. Finally, additional assistance and monies may be payable to residents who are deemed disabled. This mitigation assistance is outlined at pages 68 and 69 of the report. For those residents who cannot move their mobile home to another park, the mitigation assistance begins with purchase of their home at Buena Vista at its appraised and on-site value. Further, the mitigation assistance includes, again, startup costs, payment of the first and last month's rent, and security deposit at either a new apartment or another mobile home park, and an amount for moving their personal property to a new home. Finally, the ordinance specifically states that a partial rent subsidy, meaning a portion of the difference between their current rent at Buena Vista and their rent at a new apartment or mobile home park, will be paid. Again, additional assistance and monies are payable to residents who are deemed disabled. That portion of the mitigation assistance offered is outlined at pages 73 and 74 of the RIR. We believe that in all respects, the RIR complies with the express terms of the Palo Alto Conversion Ordinance, and further, as required under Government Code 65863.7, does not exceed the reasonable cost of relocation. Further, I would point out that there has been an issue in the case regarding the definition of comparable housing and it's the reference to schools. Schools are not specifically called out in that part of the ordinance which defines comparable housing. I will submit to the hearing officer that the ordinance here adopted by Palo Alto in 2001 most closely resembles, and in many cases is verbatim copied from the City of Monrovia's mobile home conversion ordinance. And indeed, the City of Monrovia's conversion ordinance is mentioned in those hearings in 2001. In the Monrovia conversion ordinance, again, many parts of which are exactly identical to Palo Alto's, schools are specifically called out as a factor in comparable housing. They are not called out in the Palo Alto conversion ordinance. And I would submit that the schools, the quality of the schools in Palo Alto was high in 2000 and 2001, as it certainly is today. Finally, I would like to say a few words about my client who has been, to say the least, vilified in this process for its decision, for the family's decision to close the park. The park is and always has been private property. It is the legal right of a private property owner in California, and specifically a mobile home park owner, under relevant portions of the Subdivision Map Act as found in the Government Code and relevant provisions of the Mobile Home Residency Law, to close, convert, or cease the operation of a mobile home park. Again, I direct your attention to an exhibit which is in the residence binder, which they've just handed to us, in which the city acknowledges in a staff report that the park owner has the right to close the park. The Gisser family has owned and operated the park since 1986, a period of 28 years. It has made the difficult decision to close the park. I point out that its rents of, on average, $685 per month for space rent, exclusive of utilities, are extremely low. The park owner raised rents in 2008 and again in 2010, effective January 1, 2011. Thus, for a period of 29 months, the park owner has not raised rents on a park-wide basis. Certain space rents have been increased when there has been a vacancy per the terms of the rent control ordinance. I would ask how many other rental properties, whether they be apartments in Palo Alto or the surrounding cities or mobile home parks, have not raised rents in 29 months. In conclusion, I submit that the relocation impact report fulfills the requirements of the ordinance and does offer mitigation assistance adequate to mitigate the adverse impact of closing the park. If, however, it is the finding of the hearing officer that the mitigation assistance offered is not adequate, I request a specific finding by the hearing officer as to the amount of adequate mitigation. It does not advance the process or the interest of either the park owner or the residents not to make a finding as to the range or as to a specific amount of mitigation assistance which the hearing officer deems appropriate under the terms of the ordinance. That's all I have, Mr. Labadie.
Did you plan to call any witnesses?
Yes, we're calling Mr. Dave Richmond. We're calling Mr. Dave Richmond, the designated housing relocation specialist.
The plan was for Margaret to present her witness first.
Dave, you're going to sit there. So just to be clear, Mr. Richmond is going to make a statement and then subject to your questions. I'm not doing any question and answer with him.
Good evening. My name is David Richmond. I'm with AutoTemp, AUTOTMP.
Can you speak up, please?
I think I am trying to. We provide relocation advisory services whenever Residents or businesses are impacted by projects, both by government agencies and for-profit and nonprofit developers. We do this throughout the nation, but primarily here in Northern California. We've been involved with 9 mobile home park closures to date, both privately funded closures and publicly funded closures. We initially were interviewed by the city in a competitive process and chosen to provide the advisory assistance for the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park, and subsequently have approved to provide the relocation assistance in the implementation of the RIR. And that's the extent of my statement.
If you could stay put for a minute. Ms. Morris, did you have some questions for the witness?
So my colleague Sue Himmelrich from Western Property does have a few questions.
Thank you. Mr. Richmond, my name is Sue Himmelrich. I'm an attorney with Western Center on Law and Poverty. And I have just a few questions for you. As I understand what you just said, you're going to be providing the relocation assistance.
I'm sorry, there's some people in the background having trouble hearing you. Maybe you could speak a little
my
closer.
mic's turned on. I
Maybe you
mean,
could speak a little closer to the mic.
Yeah.
hold on.
Maybe hold it like your back.
Okay, how's that?
Thank you.
Okay. I have to say, it's rare people say they can't hear me, so this is a new experience. Did you play any role in the preparation of the RIR?
Did I prepare the RIR? Or to what extent did I play a role?
Well, did you help to formulate the numbers that are contained in the RIR or to
No.
produce them? Did you help to formulate the proposed mitigation numbers in the RIR?
No. The only thing that we did was, after interviewing the residents, provide data in a aggregate manner to the developers.
When you say provide data, you mean data regarding the individual homeowner, the homeowners, homeowner residents?
Residents is correct.
And have you reviewed the RIR in terms of what the offer is in terms of mitigation for the homeowners?
I have certainly read the RIR.
And my question is this. It's my understanding that, and probably yours too, since it's in the RIR, that the average amount for somebody who cannot move their home to another park and wants to move into another mobile home park is an average of $18,000 plus their startup costs, which are approximately $4,000. And that is the number that's proposed as mitigation. Is that your understanding as well?
My understanding is that there's several categories of compensation. One, if someone's to move to another mobile home park, that includes the acquisition of their home and fair market value in place, and some moving assistance as outlined by the ordinance. Whether it's the $18,000 figure they use, I'm not familiar with that.
So my question with respect to those people who are moving to a different park is whether you've done any, who want to move to a different park or live in a mobile home in a different park, is whether you've done any research to determine whether that's possible based on the numbers in front of you within 35 miles of this park.
Is it possible for a resident who currently owns a mobile home to purchase another home in another mobile home park?
Yeah, so if that person has a home in Buena Vista and they get their fair market value and they get the $18,000 and they get their startup costs and they get whatever other assistance they get, are you aware of any other mobile home park that has housing available for the people who live in this park within 35 miles?
I think that.
At this price, at this price.
I think they could purchase other homes, but they would have to finance some sort of balance as associated, as part of that acquisition.
And what kind of balance do you think that would be? Do you have a range?
Based upon experience, I would say, using your $18,000 figure, it could be anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 more.
So you think that if you start with the 18,000, there are mobile homes they can buy for 38,000 that are comparable within 35 miles?
I think there's mobile homes available to acquire. I think there's a question of what the definition of comparable would be.
When I looked at the numbers, and I suspect you did, for the comparable homes in the latest draft of the relocation report, the lowest number I saw was about 68,000. Did you see that too?
I read the IR. I also know from experience that a lot of mobile homes we find for residents to purchase are not listed in the MLS and are have for sale signs on them. So there's a full range of mobile homes available.
When you say full range, something between 38,000 and up.
$60,000, $70,000 and up, yes.
Wait, is it 38,000 and up, or 60 or 70 and up?
That full range, there's mobile homes available.
And with respect to the people who would be willing to go into an apartment rather than going into a mobile home, they'll get their mobile home appraised value, and then I think the proposal is 40% of the rental payment. Is that right? That's right. The difference in the rental payment. So 60% of the difference in the rental payment will fall on the homeowners in the homeowner in the park who's moving to an apartment, plus the startup cost. Is that correct? The first, last.
That's
correct.
Right? That's my understanding. Yes.
And can you tell me what segment of the housing market could provide rentals for the current homeowners in the park at their current level of, I think Ms. Nanda said, $685? Is there anything?
Could any of the residents rent an apartment for $685?
Find one to rent. I mean,
In the Bay Area, probably not.
so what's going to happen? It's your job to find them relocation. You're going to relocate them. Is that correct?
We provide advisory assistance to relocate.
Okay, so if you have somebody from this park who wants to move to an apartment in the Bay Area at relatively the rent they're paying now, there is no such thing. Is that what I understood you just said?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richmond. We don't have any further questions for you.
Well, we've got a break here. I just wanted to indicate for the record that the parties have submitted some additional documents which will be entered as part of the record. On behalf of the park owner, it's documents pertaining to the original adoption of the conversion ordinance, and then the Residents Association attorney has submitted a binder full of documents, including correspondence and expert reports and other documents, which will also be made part of the record of proceedings. So this time, Ms. Nanda, did you have any additional testimony or documents you'd like to submit?
Not at this time.
Okay. Then I'll turn to the attorneys for the Residents Association. It's your opportunity to make a statement.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Labadie and everyone else. My name is Melissa Morris. I am the attorney for the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park Residents Association. I'm an attorney with the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley, which is a nonprofit legal services organization. My colleague Nadia Aziz, who works with me at the Law Foundation, is here with me, as well as my co-counsel, Matt Dolan, from the law firm of Sidley Austin. And you heard earlier from Sue Himmelrich, who's from the Western Center on Law and Poverty, which is a statewide nonprofit organization working on affordable housing and other social justice issues throughout California. The Buena Vista Residents Association represents about 80%, or actually more than 80% of the people who live in the park. The association's membership includes both homeowners who live in the mobile homes and residents who live in the rental units, including studio rental units on the property. Over 400 people live in Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. This is adults, children, seniors, families, single people, the whole range. Of the households who live there, almost all are very low income, and almost all are homeowners. These are people who own their own homes and who stand not just to lose the place where they live, but the home that they have purchased. It's rare to own a home if you're a very low-income person in Silicon Valley. In fact, mobile home parks represent one of the only opportunities for low-income people in this area to own their homes, to have a private space, and to build equity. And Buena Vista is one of the only sources of unsubsidized affordable housing in Palo Alto. So when we talk about the closure of the park, we're talking about a loss not just to the residents who live there, who are looking at having to move their kids out of schools, who are looking at moving away from their friends, their jobs, their extended families, but also a loss to the community. Palo Alto will lose what it has been for many years, an important resource in meeting the housing needs of both the city and the region. And that's why in 2001, an ordinance both to control rents at Buena Vista and to govern the closure of Buena Vista was passed. Yes, the ordinance does assume that under the right conditions, an owner of a mobile home park can close the park, can sell the property, can redevelop it. But the ordinance requires that in order for those things to happen, the residents who live in the park must be adequately compensated for their homes, and they must be given relocation benefits that are meaningful, that allow them to move to comparable housing that is safe and stable. In this instance, the park owner bears the burden of proving that what is being offered to the residents through the relocation impact report is adequate to do those things, that it's adequate both to compensate them for their loss and to give them access to comparable housing in the area. And it doesn't do that. What's being offered, as you'll see in the written reports that have been submitted so far, and the testimony of Dr. Barr today, the testimony of Professor Padilla tomorrow, and the testimony of the park residents, is that what's being offered is not sufficient to move these residents to safe and stable homes where they have comparable access to the same amenities that they have here at Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. So I'll talk a little bit about what we will be presenting on behalf of the Residents Association for the oral portion of the hearing, both for you, Mr. Labadie, and for the audience. Today you'll hear from Dr. Ken Barr, who is a mobile home park expert. Dr. Barr reviewed the RIR. He also conducted other research and interviews, and we'll talk about what his opinion as an expert is in terms of whether or not the relocation benefits are sufficient. You'll hear tomorrow from residents of the park. You'll hear from residents with disabilities who rely on public transit to get to their jobs or to get to their doctors. You'll hear from residents who have children in Palo Alto schools, who have high hopes for their kids, knowing that getting an education in some of the country's best public schools means great opportunities for those kids. It means the likelihood of getting into a good college. It means the possibility of a greater career. It means the chance of economic improvement. And you'll hear from people who simply don't have enough money to afford anywhere else to live in the Bay Area. The average income of Buena Vista Mobile Home Park residents is $3,500 per house, or sorry, $35,000 per household per year. In Santa Clara County, the average apartment rent is over $2,200 per month. In Palo Alto, it's $3,400 per month. Without adequate mitigation assistance, these residents will not be able to continue living in this community. Mobile home park rents are less, But to purchase a new mobile home, to start up in a new mobile home park, many of the mobile homes in the area cost $100,000 or more, which is far more than the average of $18,000 to $19,000 that's being offered to pay for the in-place value of Buena Vista Mobile Home Park residents' mobile homes. Given this reality, the range of benefits that's being offered in the relocation impact report will not be enough to give these people access to a new home in a new community or a new home in this community. You'll also be hearing from Professor Amado Padilla tomorrow, who is a professor at Stanford who actually worked with Buena Vista residents, talked to them about their children's educational experiences, and has conducted a lot of research in the field regarding specifically education of immigrant and minority children in public schools. Ms. Nanda pointed out that schools are not enumerated among the list of amenities in the mobile home park conversion ordinance. But that list is not exclusive. It specifically says amenities such as includes a list, but makes it clear that other things must be considered. And when you're talking about Palo Alto, and when you're talking about Palo Alto schools, education is one of the most important amenities that people move here for, whether they're buying a house, renting an apartment, or buying a mobile home. It's the reason people live here, it's the reason people stay here, is so that their children can have a quality education. And so to simply discount the quality of Palo Alto schools and talking about what the meaning of comparable housing is inappropriate and unfair to the residents. Given the above, the amount of relocation that's being offered is not sufficient, and the park owner has not borne their burden to prove that the package that they've put together for these residents will provide them a meaningful opportunity to get into new housing. As a result, we are asking that you reject the relocation impact report outright and require the owners to submit a new proposal before the park closure can move forward. So we have one witness. I don't know if you want to have Dr. Barr testify right now or if now would be a good opportunity for a break for the court reporter.
Well, we've been going for about 35 minutes, so how long do you think his testimony will take?
I think that it won't put us over an hour, but I'm not 100% sure, and part of it depends on if Ms. Nanda has questions or not.
Well, why don't we go ahead and take a short break, 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll get started with Dr. Barr.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Yeah. My name is Kenneth Barr. His last name is spelled B-A-A-R. I'm an attorney and an urban planner. I have a PhD in urban planning. Principally, I've worked as consulting and research for local governments on housing policy issues. I've also done teaching on land use, planning and housing policy. I've been consultant to numerous cities on mobile home park issues. I've prepared fair return analyses for 17 cities in mobile home park rent stabilization cases. My articles and testimony have been frequently cited in state Supreme Court and Court of Appeal decisions. I've done studies on the operation of mobile home ownership and mobile home parks for 6 cities in California, including the city of Los Angeles. Outside of California, twice I was a Fulbright scholar in East Europe, and I was also a consultant to the World Bank and USAID in some of the Soros Foundation-funded programs. The task that I was asked to perform in this case, and I was hired by the attorneys for who were representing the residents of the park, was to review the RIR and to comment on the adequacy of the proposed mitigation measures. My report does include some additional this very specific information that I wanted to mention that was not included in the RIR. The RIR pointed that most of the residents, or all of the residents, fell in the low-income category, but that goes up to 80% of the area median income. That's pretty high. So on page 3 of my report, I provided a more detailed breakdown, which was based on viewing the survey responses that were supplied by the park residents to the relocation specialist. And basically, what that data showed, and it's on page 3 again, is that 43% of the households have an income of under $30,000. 30% of the households have an income between $30,000 and $40,000, and then 26% have an income over $40,000. So the people are not only in the low-income category, but they're far below the ceiling for the low-income category. They're very low-income households, a substantial portion of them. The other piece of data that I collected from viewing the survey responses was the length of tenancy of resident households. That's also on page 3 of my report. And 34% of the residents have lived in the park for 5 to 9 years, and about 43% have lived in the park for 10 years or more. That's the house of the households. Basically, as you know, we live in an area with an incredibly costly housing market. And the data in the RIR showed that, average rents are in neighboring communities are well over $1,500, with the exception of a lower rent in East Palo Alto, which was in the range of $1,300. And there were a few cases where point out where apartments were, renting for less than that, but the average rents and even the low end of the rents are very high and beyond the rent-paying capacity of a large majority of the households. And the other problem is, when there is a low-rent apartment, there's stiff competition for it. So it makes it extremely hard to get low-rent apartments. And as I say, the low rents are beyond the range of, or most of the low rents, and the lower levels are beyond the range of most of the residents. I have data in my report on the mobile home prices that were mentioned in the RIR. And in one data set, there were 100, and this is on page 7 of my report, in one data set that included the asking prices for 186 mobile homes, 5 were under $25,000, 5 were between $25,000 and $50,000, 13 were between $50,000 and $74,000, or $75,000. So it's true, there's some less expensive mobile homes, but very few. And again, when you have a low price for something, you have a lot of competition for it in a tight housing market. Okay, the mitigation plan has been described to you already, where the mobile homeowners would get a value, compensated for the appraised value of the mobile home by the park owner's appraisal, which averages $18,000. It goes up to $45,000, but the average is $18,000. And I put the ranges of the mobile home values, the appraised values, on page 6 of my report. What happened, in addition, And today, the relocation experts, I mean, he sort of acknowledged that, mobile homes cost more than $18,000. He said a few were 38 was a low end. I don't think it's a low end anymore. And he said that the mobile homeowners could get a loan. But there's a second problem that all the residents have. When they go to apply to rent an apartment or to live in a mobile home park, they're screened for their income, that they have to have an adequate income in relation to the rent. And a typical industry standard is that your income has to be 3 times the rent. And in the case of mobile home parks, the mobile home park, I'd say the very low end of mobile home park rents is $500. They range to up to over $1,000. I'd say $700, $800, and $900 are typical. So that means if the rent is $800, the family has to have an income of $2,400 a year just to qualify to be admitted to the park. If the mobile homeowner gets a loan, they're not only going to have enough income to be 3 times the rent, it's going to have to be 3 times the loan you're going to add the rent and the loan payment. So let's say if a household borrows $50,000 and the monthly payments on that are $300, that's going to take the monthly cost over $1,000. So they're going to need an income, over $36,000. And I think that's a very low price for a mobile home, $70,000. Let's say they get 20. And the same thing when, if the rents, if in reality, when I was speaking to housing people who work in the area, the reality is it's very tough to find a place for under $1,500. And that there's competition for it. I'm not saying there's not a single unit under $1,500, but it's very tough. You're in a competitive market. Well, qualify to pay a rent of $1,500, you have to have a household income of $4,500. And I'm not saying every single landlord applies that standard, but that's the general operation of the industry. And when I spoke to mobile home loan brokers and a real estate broker, what they said was there's been a drastic change in the last 2 years in the prices of mobile homes. What they said to me is they said 2 years ago you could get a mobile home for $50,000. Now it's very rare, and it's tough to get anything for under $100,000. And they said, and normally the park owner's attorney has pointed out, because this process took a long time, some of the data is dated a year or two, and in a normal housing market that wouldn't matter, but what's happened is this housing market has just gotten tighter and tighter in the last few years. So it's just, basically what I see is that if the residents, they'd be doing well if they can find a mobile home for $100,000. The market is so tight, and I'm not saying none of them would find mobile homes for less, but it'd be difficult. And plus, on top of that, they'd have to meet the income test to get into the park. And if they borrow money, it would even be harder to meet the income test. I also looked, the park owner they didn't mention their RIR, but I thought, well, maybe there are other things that are possible. And basically, for subsidized housing, there's a waiting list for years. And the Section 8 program, which is one of the major programs, is stop taking people on their waiting list. The waiting lists are closed. And the waiting list there are different levels of subsidized or below market rent housing. Some are for households that are up to 80% of the area median income. Those have shorter waiting list, but 80% is for households that are earning $50,000 or more. At the low end of the below market rents, the waiting lists are years long. That's the general situation. So basically, what I'd see was this, what the residents were offered with these, the proposed relocation benefits is that very few of them would be able to find any housing. I think it's commonly known that, the rents for apartments are incredibly high. They wouldn't qualify, plus they don't have the money. So, and the mobile home parks, they're not going to, a good percentage of the families are not going to meet the income standard to get into the parks. And secondly, they can't buy a mobile home with $20,000. That's not going to happen. It might happen once, but the brokers are indicating now you're, $50,000 if you're very lucky. It used to be true a few years ago, but it's more. The bottom is really about $100,000 now. And there's some mobile homes that are less. I was looking for the multiple listings, and there were some mobile homes that were selling for $70,000, but those were in parks that had a very high rents, over $1,000 a month. And what I see would happen is if with this particular proposed mitigation plan, the reality would be this, I think. The residents would end up, if they could, doubling up with another family somewhere, or they'd have to leave the area, or they'd have to move to what we would consider a slum area. Or they'd end up in a motel for a while till they ran out of whatever benefits they got. That's what I'd see. And I spoke to one person who had worked with a few hundred families who had been displaced because their Section 8 benefits, their Section 8 allowance had been cut, and they still had a rent-paying capacity of $1,500. But even with that, many of them ended up, this person said, many of them ended up homeless for a while. Some of them had to leave the areas, and this is a much higher rent-paying capacity because they're getting a subsidy. Their subsidy was reduced, so they lost the place they were living. But even with $1,500, it was very, very tough for those people. So basically, I see, the report presents a lot of data, and, we can disagree about some of the finer points of the data, et cetera, but there's just no connection between what's being offered and people being able to move into replacement housing. There's just a complete disconnect. And this one, when we talk about mitigation, these people aren't going to be able to stay in Santa Clara County. Of course, it's agreed nobody can stay in Palo Alto. So I'll talk about two other issues. One is about the appraisals. I'm not an appraiser. I've done a lot of research about trends and housing values and whatever, but the appraisals were based on sales prices that were a few years old. I understand why the appraiser did that. The appraisal report was prepared in 2013. But prices have gone way up since then. Plus, I found the residents in their responses to the survey put what they had paid for mobile homes residents who had bought the mobile homes between 2001 and 2009 reported higher purchase prices than any of the appraisals. And I don't think that the housing values have gone down since that period because they're near the roof, through the roof now. And the other issue that came up in the report was, and it was required by the ordinance to present evidence about the return on investment. And what happened was the report indicated that the park owner had paid $4 million for the mobile home park with partners, and then he bought out the mobile home, the partners, for $6 million in 2001. He purchased the park in 1986 with the partners and then bought out the partners. But when I looked at the parcel map and the deeds, it looked to me that the $4 million purchase actually that purchase price included not only the mobile home park land, but also included the strip mall in front of the mobile home park and the gas station area. But, I wanted to be careful, and we asked for clarification about this because I didn't want to make a mistake, but the answer we got was, well, the relocation, we gave the information that was required by the relocation report. But that information doesn't clarify what happened here. We had a specific question, and it appears to me that the original purchase price for the portion that included the mobile home park was closer to $2.5 million, roughly. I mean, there were 4 parcels bought together, and the park boundaries are not completely contiguous with the parcels. And so what you have a situation here is, we're looking at what the residents had to pay, whether they got a good deal, et cetera, whether in terms of their rents or whatever, in terms of their rents, is it seems that 1986 there was an original investment about $2.5 million, and which the park owner, I assume, put half of that in because they had half interest. And then the park owner put in $6 million in 2001, and let's say $4 million of that went for the park share of the land. So we're talking about an investment of $5 or $6 million, I'm saying roughly. And today, as a mobile home park, the park owner's appraiser has indicated that the park is worth $14.5 million. And in fact, it is worth that in the sense that that's what the residents offered the park owner. So the appraiser said $14.5 million, and that's what the residents offered. So now the net operating income for the park is about $800,000 a year. So that's a very good return on that investment of, let's say, $6 million. And it's, and even if you would adjust that investment by inflation, which sometimes happens in the mobile home park cases, it's still a high rate of return. It's a good rate of return on investment. So, the park investment has been doing very well just as a park, and it wouldn't close as a park, or an owner wouldn't propose it, except that now there's an option in the market that's much more attractive. And that's why, but it's functioning very well economically as a mobile home park. The other comment was the rents are low, of $685 a month. They are lower than the average, but I would also point out the density of this mobile home park is much higher than the average. The density is 25 spaces per acre. Typically, the mobile home parks in this area, I'm not saying every single one, have a density of 12.5 spaces per acre or less. 12.5 is common, 8 is common, depending on the local rules. So when you're comparing these rents of $685 with a park that's charging $900, this park is getting more per acre because it's getting 2 times $685 for each one time. The other park is getting $900, and it also has much more limited amenities. For example, in the list of comparable parks that were in the appraisal, the ones that were in the area that were listed as comparable parks had swimming pools, and they had clubhouses. And I'm not sure whether this park has no clubhouse or a very limited clubhouse, but it has very, very limited amenities. So basically, this is, we could debate about the specific numbers or details, but there's such a distance between what is being proposed and what is needed to move within this area that there's no way that the proposed mitigation is going to provide these people with replacement housing in just about every case, or the vast majority of cases. And also, to put this data in perspective, you mentioned that the average offer for a mobile home based on the appraisal is $18,000. Well, that means for half the spaces, it's below that. So there's some people who are going to walk out of the park with $10,000, plus startup cost, if anyone will let them start up somewhere else. And so, as I've been repeating, it's not. It has data about the conditions of the housing market, but it doesn't connect how these people are going to get somewhere else. And the only other thing I'd make, this is a recommendation from looking at this type of issue. I don't know whether in the end, if a different decision will be made with a different mitigation number or not. If a decision is made with a mitigation number, I don't think it should be conditional, saying, well, if you move to a mobile home park, you get X, but if you don't move to a mobile home park, you don't get it. Because that's going to put the people in a difficult situation. If they're offered something, they should have the choice of what to do with it, what makes sense. And maybe it might make sense to move to a mobile home park. It might make sense to move with relatives that live 400 miles away. That's a great dislocation of cost. The mitigation should not be conditional on what people do with it, because that's just going to work poorly for people. They should, because there's a payment of money, and people should be able to figure out what makes most sense, and they're going to have a very, very difficult situation. They are losing their home, and their schools that their children are going to in Palo Alto. They have jobs near here. I don't know what's going to happen, if they're going to be able to move nearby their jobs, or they'll lose their jobs because they can't live near their jobs. So that's the conclusion. Thank you. Would you want to take this one?
Just get the microphone squared away here. So Ms. Nada, do you have some questions for the witness?
Yes, I do. So, Dr. Barr, I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes with you with regard to your credentials that are included at the rear of the report. I wanted to ask, with respect to the consulting you have done, which is you list on page A2 for California cities and counties on mobile home park, rent control policies, drafting of ordinance, fair return issues. Have you ever, in that context, drafted a mobile home conversion ordinance?
No.
Have you ever advised a city about drafting its mobile home park conversion ordinance? Do any of these cities, was that regarding mobile home park conversions?
No, I wasn't working on a conversion ordinance.
Okay. And with respect to well, let me start with, when you acted as an expert witness in the various trial courts, which is listed on page A6 of your curriculum vitae, did any of those cases involve closures of a mobile home park, and I would exclude from that a resident subdivision of a mobile home park?
No, those weren't closure cases.
Okay. And then with respect to the court opinions citing your law review articles, are you aware of any of those court opinions, are any of those cases concerning the closure of a mobile home park under a mobile home park conversion ordinance?
No, they talked about the nature of the rental how the mobile home business works and the nature of mobile home tenancy.
Okay. And so, once again, on page A7, the court opinions, concluding testimony, that you provided substantial evidence. Do any of those relate to the closure of a mobile home park?
No, those weren't closure cases.
Okay. And then so then on page A8, the expert reports on fair return rent increase applications, is it a fair statement then that with respect to those expert reports, they also do not concern mobile home closures?
No,
Is that correct?
those were not closure cases.
Okay. So now then, Dr. Barr, so let me ask, in terms of the data that you included on page 3, does that data include the people who occupy the studio apartments?
Okay, the length of tenancy does not. The household incomes, yes, because that's the way it was supplied by the city. But I looked at first of all, only 12 of them out of, I forget exactly how many of the responses were from people living in the apartments as opposed to mobile homes. And I looked through that data, and it wasn't substantially different. First, it was a small percentage of the data, and it wasn't substantially different. So I don't think it significantly affected the distribution that's reported here of household income levels.
Are you aware of whether or not the city of Palo Alto ever provided that data to the park owner?
I don't know.
Okay. Then, Dr. Barr, you in your discussion of state law in the report, of course, you recite the relevant government code section 65863.7, and then you then say, however, the proposed replacement project may be a condominium project and therefore a subdivision project, in which case a different section of the government code would apply. Do you have any information, Dr. Barr, that there is a condominium project proposed after the closure of the park?
Okay, I don't know, but I'd also say it's common when new buildings are built now to get an underlying subdivision map. But I presented these both here just so people were aware of them. I didn't say what the park owner was going to do.
Okay, but in your discussion of government code section 66427.4, you state that the local agency, and I'm going to paraphrase so that I don't include the phrase floating home marina residence, since that is not at issue here. The local agency may require the subdivider to take steps to mitigate any impact of the conversion on the ability of displaced mobile home park residents to find adequate space in a mobile home park. Do you, in your mind, Dr. Barr, do you feel that the reference to adequate space in a mobile home park is an attempt, or that in fact that section really is referring to finding comparable housing in a mobile home park?
Well, the next paragraph says that this section establishes a minimum standard for local regulation, and I'm skipping part of a sentence, but I don't think I'm changing the meaning, and shall not prevent a local agency from enacting more stringent measures. So I think those have to be put together.
Okay, but do you feel that the first, okay, let's assume that you're correct on that. Do you feel that subsection C is in fact a reference to finding comparable housing in a mobile home park?
Well, it says on the ability of displaced mobile home park residents to find adequate space in a mobile home park. So you're saying, I don't understand.
My question is, do you interpret that as meaning that section requires the park owner, or it allows, let me restate, it allows the local agency to require that residents find comparable mobile homes in a mobile home park?
Okay, I see what you're saying. You could say, it says find adequate space, it doesn't use the word comparable, but I guess, when I looked at this, I didn't study that paragraph the way you did, but when I look at these two paragraphs together, I think it gives the local agency very broad discretion.
Okay. All right, so then moving on, now, when you discuss in your report, the overriding, as you call it, the overriding constraint on availability, as you call it, of alternative housing, is the household income levels here. I'm on now page 5 of your report.
Okay.
That this is the overriding constraints.
Yeah.
Would you agree that the park owner has no control over household income in this park?
No, that I'll agree.
Right, okay. So, now then, would you, you said that you had conversations, you've related, as you say in the report, in an anecdotal manner, Dr. Barr, that you had conversations with real estate brokers regarding the sales prices of mobile homes and loan brokers regarding
Right.
mobile homes. Do you have any information or belief, Dr. Barr, as Dave Richmond just stated, that in smaller, older parks, homes are not often listed on the multiple listing service?
I think there's some. I don't know what proportion. I agree there's some.
Okay, and so are you aware in this particular park, for example, when the last time a home in that park ever appeared on a multiple listing service?
I don't know when the last date was.
Okay. So, but you do have some understanding then, Dr. Barr, that it could be in any park, any park owner can sell their home by owner, correct?
Right.
Any mobile homeowner can
Right.
sell their home by owner. And that data does not appear on a multiple listing service, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now,
But I guess, my feeling is that, when I look at this, you'd have to have some information about the magnitude of that, because here we say, well, this exists. Is it substantial? Is it just friends finding places? Otherwise we have no, what proportion is this?
so you had no information in the resident questionnaires which you reviewed, which we did not have access to, that said whether or not the people in the park bought their home through a resident who listed it for sale on a multiple listing service?
Yeah, I didn't have that information.
Okay. Now, you have stated that now on page 8 that the appraised values seem to be disconnected from actual in-place values in the marketplace. And you talk about Palo Alto as a city where studios rent for $2,000 per month and rents in adjacent cities are almost as high. So I want to go back to just revisit a fundamental fact. The mobile homes, and have you been to the park, Dr. Barr?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so do you recognize that the park has a variety of vehicles in terms of travel trailers, fifth wheelers, RVs, and mobile homes? That it's a mixture of these types of?
Yes.
Okay, and do you recognize, Dr. Barr, that intrinsically as an item of personal property, that a mobile home, for example, there are mobile homes here that were manufactured in the 50s. Do you believe, as an intrinsic matter of personal property, does it have any value? I'm not asking whether it's sitting at Buena Vista. I'm asking, does it have value as just an item of personal property?
No, I'd say that, the mobile homes, if you don't have a place to put them, older mobile homes, they're not worth anything or very little.
Okay.
But but this is in place value. They have a value. They have a place. Somebody paid to get into that place, and
Right.
they have a value.
So, but when we talk about, Dr. Barr, the purchase of, so when the ordinance requires that the park owner purchase the homes at their in-place appraised value, he is in essence buying back his own land. Because isn't it true that because the intrinsic value is very little or nothing, its value is because it is situated in Palo Alto, which, as you point out, has these very extraordinary housing costs?
Well, when you say his land, I mean, there are varying property rights here, and the property rights that the residents have is to live in that space which they paid for. So they have some property rights too. When you say his land, it's his land, but it's also the residents have rights in that land too.
But isn't it true, Dr. Barr, that under the Civil Code, specifically 798.56G, that a homeowner's tenancy can be terminated because of a change of use of the park, which includes a cessation of use, provided that the government code section you have referred to is followed and adequate mitigation measures are provided?
If adequate mitigation. So this is a property right the residents have to adequate mitigation. You have various property rights here.
Right, but it is a stated, as you know, well, let me ask you, Dr. Barr, since you have done so much work in the area of mobile home parks, isn't it true that a mobile home tenancy can only be terminated for a cause?
That's my understanding.
Right, and the causes are enumerated in Civil Code Section 798.56. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I don't remember the
Okay.
specific code section.
Okay. So then, Dr. Barr, I want to go to your, well, let me ask you this. You have pointed out that the park appraisal reports were submitted at the time of the first relocation impact report and were in fact performed in January 2013, correct?
Yeah, I didn't say what they were in conjunction to. I pointed out they were prepared January 2013.
Okay, sorry. So, and I'll represent to you that they were submitted at the time of the first relocation impact report because that is required under the terms of the conversion ordinance. Do you know, is there a requirement under Palo Alto's conversion ordinance that the appraisals be updated at any point in the process?
No, and I didn't mean to infer that. More, the comment I was making is we have this very unusual market where difference of a year or two has made a big difference in the values of mobile homes, the prices of mobile homes. And this is a very unusual situation, but I'm pointing out, and this has happened, it's a reality. I understand the appraisal was done in 2013 and it was based on data before that.
Right. Dr. Barr, with respect to your discussion of relocation to market rate apartments, first of all, are you aware of any requirement in the ordinance for the park owner to discuss relocation to, as you call it, nonprofit, subsidized, or inclusionary housing?
No, I wasn't criticizing the report for that. It was more as I was hoping to find that there were other avenues.
Right.
And I couldn't, I wanted to check that out. I didn't want to prepare a report and discover there's some source out there that I was missing.
Okay. Now, what you have said in your discussion about relocation to market rate apartments is that if a tenant or if a mobile home owner here at Buena Vista, because there are no other mobile home parks in the city of Palo Alto, if they want to, for example, remain in Palo Alto to keep their children in the school district, because that is an important to them, that they basically have no other option but to relocate to a market rate apartment, or, as you put it, get on a very long list for subsidized nonprofit or inclusionary housing, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, as to the prices that apartment owners are charging in the city of Palo Alto for market rate apartments, do you agree that this particular park owner, I will represent to you that he does not rent apartments other than the studios at the park, that he has no control over the price of those market rate apartments?
No, I understand that.
Okay. And secondly, that he does not, he has no control over how much subsidized nonprofit or inclusionary housing exists within the city of Palo Alto?
No, I understand. I pointed out in my report, the park owner did not cause the housing shortage, but the housing shortage is a reality, And actually, the other side of this is what's happening. This reality is it's this housing shortage that's driving up the land values so high that he wants to change the park to another use. If it weren't for this incredibly tight housing shortage, the alternate uses wouldn't be so much more valuable.
So, but let me ask then, for example, do you have, you noted in a footnote here that 2 households from the park had succeeded in obtaining tenancies in a non-market project that opened recently in Palo Alto. There were 1,800 applicants for the 50 units in that project. I'm on page 13, it's your footnote 26?
Yes.
Okay. So do you have any information that any other residents have placed themselves on any lists?
Okay, that I don't know. I think a few have, but I don't know.
If I'm asking, I'm not asking your opinion as necessarily an expert, Dr. Barr, but just your opinion. If you were in the position of a resident at Buena Vista now, knowing that these waiting lists are several years long, would you try to place your name on such a list now?
Well, I mean, I'd say I'd probably try, but it might be too discouraged if they say that's a lot of waiting lists were closed for years. Section 8 has been closed, so maybe I'd do it because there's no harm. But on the other hand, it seems could seem pretty hopeless to these people.
But in your discussion of, again, in your discussion in the report, Dr. Barr, when talking about, you basically, I'm paraphrasing, but you said if a mobile homeowner at Buena Vista presently wanted to remain in Palo Alto, they're going to have to rent most likely a 4-market rate apartment.
Right.
And most would not qualify for 2 or 3 bedrooms. It's going to be a 1-bedroom apartment, correct? Isn't that what you said?
Well, no, I'd say in the market, I'd say people can't even qualify for the 1-bedroom apartment here.
Okay.
Or even the studio. I mean, rents are in Palo Alto, I think you're starting $2,000. So that would take an income of $6,000 a month.
Okay. And do you understand, though, too, Dr. Barr, that no matter how you construe whether you feel that the 40% partial rent subsidy that the park owner is offering is too low or not, that the ordinance itself provides for a rent subsidy of only 12 months.
I understand that.
Right,
That's
okay.
one of the. But on the other hand, the mitigation, package has to be adequate, and the way the people that sort of leans it towards the mobile home replacement because that's more substantial.
Well, and it's your suggestion in the report, Dr. Barr, again, speaking about a hypothetical person who wants to remain in Palo Alto who possibly could qualify for the 1-bedroom apartment, that they're going to use the equity in their mobile home to remain in that apartment after the expiration of the 1-year period, correct?
That's true, but basically, I see it. You're losing your equity. I mean, it's an equity that's sucked up in the rent. So
But
it's a loss of wealth.
But Dr. Barr, since there is no other mobile home park in Palo Alto, if you are going to remain in Palo Alto, aren't you going to spend that equity on your rent eventually, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I see this as a completely hypothetical question. I mean, maybe except for a few residents, because they just don't qualify to rent an apartment in the city.
Okay. Okay, so then moving on, Dr. Barr, on page 13, you begin in section 3, an entire section of the report that takes into talking about the economic return from the park in its current use and after a conversion. So you begin that first paragraph under that by talking about, under the ordinance, a park owner may seek a partial or total exemption on the ground that imposition of any relocation assistance would eliminate substantially all reasonable use or economic value of the property for alternate uses. Do you have any information or understanding that the park owner is now or has ever sought a partial or total exemption from this ordinance?
No, but at this point, I wanted to raise this because it's in the ordinance.
Yes, but is it in fact relevant, Dr. Barr, when if he is not seeking a partial or total exemption, why is the discussion of reasonable use or economic value of the property for alternate uses, and as you then go on to discuss his rate of return, et cetera, why is that relevant?
Well, you're proposing a certain mitigation level. On the other hand, I've concluded that very substantial mitigation would be needed, a substantial multiple of the amount that the park owner proposed. And therefore, someone should be aware of these issues.
But Dr. Barr, what you do in Section 3 is, in fact, you impose a rent control analysis on this property. Isn't that true? By talking about his fair rate of return and by assuming certain things with respect to, what he paid for it and what he's going to sell it for, et cetera. Don't you make certain assumptions in this?
Well, when you say assumptions, I tried to find out exactly what he paid for it, and I instead, and I used the park owner's numbers of the $4 million, and I mean the other reason I, brought this up was because the park owner had written, and it's on page 14 of my report, that the park owner has afforded the residents of the park an opportunity to live in below market rate housing for 27 years. And so if the park owner had raised rents in accordance with the minimum limits of the city's rent control ordinance, the space rents would be on the average $1,550 plus utilities. So this doesn't have the word sacrifice in it. But what it's an indication of giving, and I'm pointing out that there was a substantial return. It wasn't just giving. The park residents were paying rent. There was a good return on the land, and also having these people in the park. If these people weren't in the park, and the land, it was vacant land, it would have been much more expensive to hold that investment. These people carried the investment till the values shot up.
These people carried the investment, but on the other hand, he has rented, and as you've pointed out, in some cases for over 20 years, it is in fact a contractual arrangement where they have been provided his land to situate their mobile home on.
No, that's correct. It was a two-way street.
Yes.
He provided land, they paid rent.
Right. And with respect to your discussion on page 14, when you say that that rents were increased by 21% since you're quoting the RIR now, then you say this increase may be compared with the increase in the consumer price index during this period of 29%. So while the rent increases for this time period were below the increase in the CPI, it appears that they exceeded the CPI increase for the period, and then you go on for a period of 1995 to 2013.
Right.
But isn't it true that the ordinance provides not only for a CPI increase, but plus 6%?
Okay, but I'll say, first of all, and I looked at the staff report I got today, that was not a rent control, or you might call it a rent control ordinance. It was not a rent control ordinance as we know them. There are about 100 mobile home park space rent control ordinances in the state. They allow CPI increases. CPI plus 6% is a rent shock ordinance. It means you can't shock the people in 1 year. But when you say CPI plus 6% for year and after year, it's not a rent control ordinance. It's something that, as you point out, if he had raised the rents by that to $1,550, that would have sent the rents through the moon. It wasn't a rent control ordinance.
But Dr. Barr, do you have any understanding that my client did not draft that rent control ordinance?
Well, I believe it.
Okay, and do you have any understanding that it came into effect after he attempted to raise the rents in 1999, and then effective January 2000, and then, as I related in my opening statement, and you can certainly read the transcripts that I've provided to Ms. Morris and her team, that it was in fact a rent, there are two portions of the ordinance, and one, they're calling it a rent control ordinance. You're not, but they are.
Well, but they made it, they have a comment in the staff report. I saw it today. I mean, I didn't read it real slowly or carefully, but there was a comment in the staff report that we don't consider this rent control. We don't have the resources to administer rent control, and it's really to address these sudden shocks. And matter what they call it, CPI plus 6%, even if they want to call it a rent control ordinance, it's not.
But so do you have any understanding, though?
Substantively. I mean, you can call it whatever you want.
But do you have any understanding of the last time that the Gisser family ever raised the rent to the level permitted under the ordinance?
Well, no, they didn't raise it to 1550,
Right.
but I'm saying it would have been triple the rents in the other parks in the sense it's 50% higher than the other parks, and they had double the density.
But it would not have violated the ordinance, correct?
No, it wouldn't have violated the ordinance, but I can tell you what would have happened. The city would have passed some more severe measure, because that's what happens when park owners raise the rents through the roof. It doesn't happen in every city, but usually it happens. The city comes in and rolls back the rent. That's very common.
But in response, in this case, and in fact, in 1999, when he noticed a $100 rent increase, the city passed the rent ordinance, which is before you today.
I understand that.
Okay, so they did not do what you say they should have done or normally do, which is roll back the rents, et cetera.
No, because then the park owner, didn't raise the rents to 1550. They raised them in the range of the CPI.
Okay. So now, Dr. Barr, now to conclude some of this questioning then, on page 18, what you have said is, so you have, I guess hypothetically, you've said in the, let's see, it's the fourth full paragraph on page 18, the outcome of a mitigation that would require mitigation payments of $100,000 per displaced household would leave the proposed conversion with a net value of about $19.2 million. So, first of all, I want to start by asking you, are you expressing an opinion in this report that the mitigation payments should be $100,000 per displaced household?
No, I was using that number because I felt that was sort of a minimum. There are exceptions, but basically it would cost about $100,000 to buy a replacement mobile home, and I used it as an example. I think it would help the people. Some people it would be adequate for, and some not.
Okay, but in your analysis, then, Dr. Barr, what you have said is that then you go on from there to basically say, to then make the conclusion that even if he paid $100,000 per displaced household, he gets a net value of about $19.2 million, which would still provide the park owner with an additional $5 million profit from the conversion. I'm going to ask you this, Dr. Barr. First of all, are you aware of any statute in the state of California that links the amount of mitigation assistance to the value of the property or what the park owner will net from its sale?
No, but I felt I was placing these in perspective of what's happening.
Okay. Now, are you aware of any case law, or are you aware of any case there that links what the amount of mitigation assistance should be based upon either the value of the land or what the park owner is going to net?
No, but I think, there's discussion here about the profit, in the RIR about profits, et cetera, and I felt this was necessary to give a perspective.
But conversely, Dr. Barr, if you were to learn that he was selling the property for far under market, let's assume for my hypothetical, he's selling it for $2 million, does that mean under your hypothetical that the mitigation payments should be reduced because his profit is reduced?
No, but at that point, it would be better to keep it as a mobile home park because it's worth $14.5 million, and it's producing $800,000 a year.
Yeah, I hate to interrupt here, but we're going to need to give the court reporter and the interpreters a break. So are you close to concluding your question?
Yes, I think so. Let's see. So I just want to confirm one point then, Dr. Barr. You reached the $100,000 figure that you state on page 18 because that is your belief that that's the approximate cost of a comparable mobile home.
Right, now I'm not
Okay.
saying none are under that, but I'm saying that's the market.
And so one last question then. So you've stated that the mitigation assistance here is inadequate. Do you have an opinion as to a figure, whether it be a range or a specific figure, of what is adequate in your opinion?
No, I'd say the 100,000 is I don't think it would help substantially, as I say. I think more recent, this report, I feel, or the RI didn't present enough information to figure out where people could end up and would have to spend more time with the residents, et cetera. I think it's a starting point.
So then, Dr. Barr, it is true that, do you believe that relocation assistance is somewhat individualized, depending on whether a resident wants to move to Sonora or whether they want to remain in Sunnyvale?
There's a plus and a minus to that, and as I pointed out in my recommendations, I think more you have to figure out a general rule, because if you make it individualized, I think you're going to set up funny situations where you say if you do that, you get nothing or very little, but if you do that, you get this. I don't think it will work well. I think sort of have to figure out a generalized situation. Maybe it should vary somewhat according to household size. And there's no perfect answer to this situation.
But given that, you don't have a figure.
No, I don't have a precise figure.
Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, so why don't we, did you have anything further with this witness?
I will have a few follow-up questions, but I'm happy to take a break
Why don't we
first.
take a brief break for about 5 minutes and give the court reporter and the interpreters a chance to rest.
Okay.
I'd like to get started back again with the questioning of Dr. Barr. It appears that there is a relatively short amount of work left to do tonight. After we conclude with this witness, we're going to adjourn until 6:30 tomorrow night, and that will be the opportunity for the park residents to speak. And if we have time, we can begin with public comment as well tomorrow night. So, Ms. Morris?
Thank you. Dr. Barr, I have just a few questions for you. The first is a clarification question. Earlier you said for a mobile home park with a space rent of $800, it would be that you would need an income of $2,400 a year. Was that $2,400 a year or $2,400 a month?
That was $2,400 a month.
Okay, so closer to $29,000 a year. I think it's
Well,
20. You'll
I'll respect your
defer
multiplication.
to my calculator. Okay. And I know a lot of the households in Buena Vista have children in the household and have maybe 3 or more people in the household. And you're looking at the housing market and your preparation for writing this report. Did you get a sense of what kind of constraints having a larger household might have on the ability to locate housing, say one-bedroom apartments or mobile homes in certain parks?
Okay, well, let me say this. When I looked through the resident responses, and I didn't enter this data systematically, but it seemed like there were a significant number of households that had more than 3 persons. And the way that's relevant is because of occupancy standards. And what I was told was that typically in mobile home parks, they won't let somebody move into a one-bedroom mobile home if they're more than 3 persons, because the rule is 2 per bedroom and 1 for the living room. And the same for apartment rentals and even in the subsidized housing and the so basically that's another constraint that blocks some of these households, and I'm not saying how many, but I think it was a significant number, from moving into the least expensive housing, because these industry practices that they one-bedroom places will not be rented to them, or they won't be able to move into a park if they buy a one-bedroom mobile home. They can't move 4 people into that mobile home.
So if the RIR only proposes moving most of the families to one-bedroom units, whether mobile homes or apartments, then it would severely constrain the housing options for those families.
Well, yeah, what the RIR said, we wanted to tie the mitigation to whether the mobile home now was technically a one-bedroom mobile home. And, and often, let's say there's more than 3 people there. Well, the problem is when they're moving, even if 4 people were living in that mobile home, they might not be able to move somewhere else where they'll accept 4 people in 1 bedroom.
And then I have just a general question about the scope of what your particular project here was. Can you talk about what you set out to do in your report, and maybe sort of what you didn't set out to do in your report?
Well, I guess the basic thing is I was not hired to write the relocation impact report. I was employed to review it and consider its adequacy. That's what I was, not to come up with the answer, but to see if this was adequate.
Thank you. That's my last question.
Anything further?
So, Dr. Barr, in your report on page 10, you point out that the RIR. Oh, sorry, Dr. Barr. In your report on page 10, you point out that the RIR does contain spreadsheets projecting the overall mitigation for displaced households moving to 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments. I'm on page 10.
Okay, yes.
But you say, however, in reality, only the projections for relocation costs for moving to 1-bedroom apartments will be of any significance. My understanding of the reason you say that is because of the cost of the 2- and 3-bedroom apartments, not the constraints as to the family size.
Well, no, I'm saying that, well, partly that, but also the RIR said that if it's not technically a 2-bedroom mobile home, let's say technically it's a 1-bedroom mobile home, that when we give these people figure out their relocation benefits, we'll only give them mitigation based on them moving into a 1-bedroom place. That was my understanding, and the report RIR said there were, I don't know if it said none of the mobile homes had 2 bedrooms. It was certainly very few. So it's basically saying, here's a body of 1-bedroom mobile homes, so we're limiting our mitigation to what it would take based on a 1-bedroom apartment.
But the other thing you've said here tonight, Dr. Barr, is that the mitigation assistance is inadequate because it will not allow for the purchase of a replacement mobile home that you feel, or a comparable mobile home that you feel is more at the level of $100,000 currently. But if, as you related, mobile home parks, and most typically they do, have occupancy standards of 2 + 1 per bedroom, most of these people would have to relocate to, even in a mobile home park, you're saying that in a 1-bedroom mobile home, they could not get their present family size into that 1-bedroom mobile home in a different park, correct? Because they'd violate the occupancy standards?
Right. I didn't say most. I said a significant number.
Okay, and
yeah,
is that...
they'd have to get a 2-bedroom mobile home to be admitted to the park.
Okay, so because of the size of the household?
Right.
Okay. And did you have, But let me go back and ask you just one follow-up, different question, Dr. Barr. If you were to learn, does it make any difference in your analysis at all, in your report, if you were to learn that there is no contract of sale for the park and the park owner is simply closing the park to close it to cease use as a mobile home park?
Well, let me say, the law requires, as I understand it, mitigation of the adverse effects. So I think that applies no matter what. But there was also, issues were, well, plus I think that's a hypothetical that doesn't connect to the real world, because you don't close something that's generating $800,000 net operating income a year unless you can do something more profitable. It wouldn't make any sense. It's like you wouldn't burn down an apartment building if you couldn't put something in its place.
But it is possible to cease use.
Yeah, but it's a theoretical that, has no connection with the world.
But you in fact don't have any information on if there is a contract for sale for this property or what the amount of that sale is or anything, correct?
Well, let me say, I haven't relied on that type of information, but it just doesn't, the person would be committed as incompetent if they were going to burn down their park and it was going to be vacant land. The family would have them put in a conservancy.
Okay. No further questions.
Did you have anything else?
No, I don't.
Okay, it looks like we've come to a good break point for the evening. We're going to convene back here at 6:30 tomorrow. The Resident Association attorney will continue presenting her case, including an opportunity for park residents to speak. And then when that's concluded, if there's some time left, we'll have a chance for some public comment to start tomorrow and continue on Wednesday. Thank you all.
Thank you.